Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're tackling something pretty deep. How do entire communities recover from collective trauma? We're going to do that by looking at two really powerful stories, one from modern history and one from about 3,000 years ago.
So let's start with a really big question. How does a community even begin to heal from something as horrific as a massacre? To dig into that, we've got to go back to the early 20th century, to a crime that some people tried very, very hard to erase from history.
So, the date is April 15th, 1919. The place? A small Korean village called Jeomri. And you have to understand, this was a really tense time. The Korean people were in the middle of this huge struggle for independence from Japanese colonial rule. You see, on March 1st, this huge independence movement kicked off. And as it started to gain steam, well, the Japanese military decided they needed to send a message, a really brutal one. So they picked Jeomri to be the example. A lieutenant named Arite Yoshio marched his troops right into the village, and they had a truly terrible plan.
Just imagine hearing that. I have something to admonish you about, so everyone gather in the church. It was a lie, a horrible trap. The men of the village thought they were just going to a meeting. But once they were inside, they were locked in. The soldiers then opened fire, set the church ablaze, and shot anyone who desperately tried to escape the inferno.
Yeah, this wasn't random. It was a calculated act of pure terror. And the military immediately tried to cover it all up, to literally erase it and pretend it never happened. But, some things, they just refuse to stay buried.
And that's where this Canadian missionary, a guy named Frank Schofield, comes in. He starts hearing these rumors, these whispers about what went down. And he does something incredibly brave. He risks his own neck to go to the ruins of Jim Wright, and he starts taking pictures of the horrific evidence. Those photos, they went global. They made it impossible for the world to ignore what happened. And that right there, that commitment to just remembering, was the very first step toward any kind of healing.
Okay, so remembering was absolutely essential, but it wasn't enough. For decades, this wound just sat there, festering. It wasn't until the 1970s that the next, really crucial step happened. And this was about moving past just memory and into something deeper, atonement.
Get this, a group of Japanese Christians made a journey to Jeomri. They actually stood in front of the descendants of the people who were killed, and they repented for what their ancestors had done. And then they offered to help fund the rebuilding of the very church that was burned to the ground. That act of genuine atonement, it started to thaw decades of bitterness, and it shows us something so important. Healing a wound like this takes two things: remembering what happened and atoning for it.
Now, what's so fascinating is how this modern story of a massacre that was intentionally concealed echoes another story from thousands of years ago. But in that one, the massacre wasn't concealed. It was just forgotten.
So let's jump way back in time, to the pages of 2 Samuel in the Bible. King David is on the throne, but there's a huge problem. For 3 straight years, there's been a famine. The crops are failing, people are starving, and absolutely no one knows why. So David does what kings did back then. He asks God, what is going on? And the answer he gets is pretty shocking. Turns out the famine is because of a crime the whole nation had forgotten about, a crime against a group called the Gibeonites. See, centuries before, Israel had made this sacred promise, an oath in God's name to always protect these people.
And the previous king, King Saul, had broken that oath. He'd massacred the Gibeonites. The text says he did it out of zeal for his own people, but let's be real, it was probably a political land grab for his own tribe. The point is, the nation had moved on, they'd forgotten all about it. But the land itself, the land remembered.
So to fix this, to heal the land and end the famine, David goes directly to the surviving Gibeonites. And he asks them a really simple but powerful question. What do you need? What will it take to make this right? What does justice look like to you?
And their answer is, well, it's pretty harsh. It's the kind of justice you'd expect from the ancient world. They demand that 7 of King Saul's male descendants, his sons and grandsons, be handed over to them for execution. A life for a life, basically. And David, he has to honor it, so he agrees.
So the 7 men are executed. The debt of blood, you could say, has been paid. Justice, at least by their definition, is done. But nothing happens. The famine continues. The rains still don't come. It turns out that this kind of justice, vengeance, it wasn't enough to actually heal the land.
And this is where this story just completely pivots. It's incredible. The spotlight moves away from the kings and the politics and the violence, and it shines on this one woman who you'd think has no power at all. Her name is Rizpah. She was one of Saul's concubines, and two of the men who were just executed were her sons.
And her response to this horror, it's not what you'd expect. It's not about revenge or politics. It is a quiet, powerful act of pure grief and love. As the Bible says, she took sackcloth, spread it on a rock right there next to the bodies, and she just sat. She began this lonely, heartbreaking vigil.
And she stayed there for months, from the beginning of the spring harvest all the way until the winter rains finally started. We're talking about roughly 6 months. Day and night, she guarded the bodies of her sons and the other men, keeping the birds and wild animals away. Just this incredible, silent act of a mother's love.
Eventually, word of what Rizpah is doing gets back to King David. You have to imagine her quiet grief has become this massive public statement, and it hits David hard. It makes him realize that maybe he was missing something, that maybe true justice is about more than just vengeance.
He gets it. He realizes that you can't have communal healing if one part of that community is still drowning in pain that nobody is even acknowledging. The cycle of trauma wasn't going to end until the grief on all sides, the victims and the perpetrators' families, was seen and respected.
And that's the key to the whole story. The famine only ends after all of this happens. So let's break it down. First, you needed justice for the victims. The Gibeonites got what they asked for. But then you needed empathy for the grieving. Rizpah's sorrow had to be seen and honored. And that led to a restorative action. David goes and collects not just the bones of the 7 executed men, but also the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan, and he gives them all a proper, dignified burial. It's only after all of that that God listens to the prayers for the land, and the healing rain finally comes.
I mean, what a perfect illustration of the journey, right? You start with a wound created by this destructive, false zeal from Saul. Then you have the Gibeonites demanding retributive justice, which addresses the crime but doesn't heal everything. Then Rizpah's protective love reveals a deeper layer of pain, and finally David's restorative justice is what actually heals the whole community. It's this beautiful move from simple vengeance to a kind of justice that honors everyone's humanity.
So, when you put these two stories together, Jimri and ancient Gibeah, you're left with a really challenging question, aren't you? To truly heal a deep communal wound, do we have to care for the pain of our enemies? Both stories seem to say that memory and justice, they're absolutely vital first steps, but maybe, just maybe, the real final healing, that healing rain only comes when we can find it in ourselves to acknowledge the pain on all sides of the conflict, even the pain of those we see as the enemy.